guest today is a USA Today bestselling author. I've read all of their novels, serial killer support group, Tradwife, and their newest novel, The Last Time We Drowned, came out June 2nd. But we're recording this in May, so it hasn't yet come out. But please welcome Saratoga Schaefer. Saratoga, thanks for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. I've read all of your books now. I am very excited because I read them all like pretty recently, like kind of back to back. And each one is different, but very much has like your voice to it. I am curious, first and foremost, have you always wanted to be a writer? And what has your journey as an author been like?
I think I've always wanted to be an author, but I didn't realize that until later in life. I started writing poems and short stories when I was in elementary school, and then took my first stab at a novel in middle school, and it was like a
Wow.
fantasy about dragons, all set from the point of view of his dragon. There were no people in it at all. Like I
Okay.
started like seriously, or I thought seriously, writing when I was younger, but I didn't quite think of it as a career for a while.
Mm.
I'm not sure why. I think it was just one of those things where it's not it's not always the most lucrative thing, and maybe you don't get it in your head that you can do that as a career for a while. But I started seriously writing with the intention of trying to get published after college, and it
Mm.
took like a good 10 years plus to actually get to where I am now.
And I want to get into your what will be now your latest novel, The Last Time We Drowned. Can you give the audience a synopsis of the novel?
I love my elevator pitches. So the last time we drowned is about a bookstagrammer who joins an elite group of influencers on a private yacht, and she gets trapped on board by a hurricane, and then bodies start to drop.
I want to ask you where the idea came from, but I also want to highlight the fact that your previous novel before this, Tradwife, you I would say it's like a thriller horror. It's a little bit more horror-y than this one ish. But both Tradwife, which the audience can guess kind of the theme of that novel, and then The Last Time We Drowned, both have both tackle very relevant topics, whether it be tradwives or like influencers and things like that. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came to be and like why those were interesting stories to tell?
Yes, I have such a love-hate relationship with social media just personally, and I think there's so much to tackle there in terms of fiction or stories you can tell. So I actually wrote The Last Time We Drowned in 2023. So before
Mm.
Tradwife, I wrote Tradwife in the fall of 2024. And I wrote The Last Time We Drowned with more of a look on sort of like the external factors of social media, like who we are when we confront our online personas with other people around.
Hmm.
In this book, which is, yeah, it's a psychological thriller, it's sort of in the background a little bit more. And in Tradwife, I wanted to get really deeper, and I wanted to get internal with it, and I wanted it to be a little bit more of a character study. So in Tradwife, the social media is the forefront. It's very much involved with how Camille sees herself as a person. And in The Last Time We Drowned, it's more about how we confront, our community online,
Hmm.
but we're suddenly in real life with them. It's this idea of these massive influencers. Are they the same people online that they are when they're like partying on a yacht?
Hmm.
So there's just so much to cover there that I was like, yeah, we're going to do two social media books, and
Hmm.
they're each going to be in a different genre. So there's cool things to cover in both.
Yeah. No, and I love them both. I mean, I also love Serial Killer Support Group just because I'm like a true crime fan and I just thought like what an interesting concept to have somebody infiltrate a serial killer support group. But Tradwife was so cool to see the horror and I see how it's the newer one that you wrote. just based on like your voice. But for Last Time We Drowned, can you tell us why you chose a yacht to have all these
Mm.
influencers on and where the
I
idea
think,
came from, you know?
yeah. So the original idea was inspired by some of these influencer content houses. They've gone out of vogue slightly, but they used to be really big. This idea of putting a bunch of influencers in one house together, and there's drama and hookups and all this nonsense. This one specifically was inspired by a group called Taz's Angels, who were pretty prominent in Miami in like the late aughts, knots. And they were all women, younger women. They claimed to all be in a relationship with the titular Taz. And they, were really popular on Snapchat. They were hanging out with like DJ Khaled and all this. Like it was
God.
like a reality show. And there was actually some talk of them getting their own reality show. It never came to fruition. But there was a lot of like rumors around them and drama. And I just couldn't look away. It was fascinating. It was very entertaining. And the idea for this book really came back in that time because I kept thinking about like what would happen if one of them was murdered, which is maybe not a normal thing to think, but it was just like my story brain kicking on.
Uh-huh.
And then years later, when I was seeing more of these influencer like Hype House and all those other content houses that would pop up, it just kept sticking in my head like, well, this could be a great story idea. Like, what happens if there's like this group of them and something worse than just like you hooked up with my boyfriend happens?
Hmm.
Like, what if it gets real dark and then they're stuck and they can't go anywhere? And I thought the best way to really trap them was to put them on a boat in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah.
Um, and this sort of yacht they're on specifically is it's kind of unique. It's sort of like a houseboat. It has the ability to be anchored like beyond an actual anchor. It has these legs, these caissons that go into the water to make it more of like a floating mansion instead of just
Yeah.
a yacht. And I had seen that online and I was like, this is so cool and ridiculous. And like, why does anybody need this? So that right there was the setting. And it just sort of came together
Hmm.
perfect.
But like without giving too much away, the intricate relationships between everybody on the boat and the way that you're slowly introduced to each of them, I found really fascinating and like was such a big part of the enjoyment while reading it. And when you say kind of where it originated from, it like makes a little bit more sense, certain things now. Um, but I'm curious for your novels and for whichever one, without giving spoilers, do you ever have an ending written out that ends up not making the book, or do you kind of always know how it starts and ends?
Yeah, I always know how it starts and how it ends. I'm
Okay.
in the writing community. I'm kind of what we call a plantser. So I know sort of where the story is going. I don't have a detailed outline or anything like that. And I usually have a clear idea of the beginning and a clear idea of the end, and then I have no idea what happens in between. And I find that as I start writing.
Speaking of impact, what do you hope that people take from this book? And what do you hope people kind of feel or get out of it?
Well, I definitely hope that they're entertained. That's sort of my
Hmm.
primary concern, especially with this one that's like fun and unhinged and
Hmm.
it's a very summer appropriate book. Like I want you to be
Yes.
reading this like by the pool or on a beach
Hmm.
or when you're just like chilling outside getting some sunlight. I think it's going to be the perfect summer read.
Yeah.
Um, Beyond that, I'd love for it to make us think a little bit about our relationships with each other, not just the ones that we have in person, but the ones that we have online, and to see if those are serving us, if we're using that in a way that feels like authentic or healthy, and if not, maybe we can like just get the hell off online and delete
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
page or take a step back or take what we need to do to make sure that we're putting our mental health first and foremost. And I think it's also nice to occasionally in our life just take stock of our relationships, especially our friendships and these other maybe platonic relationships that can feel really, really immersive when we're in them. And it's important, I think, to check that every so often and be like, am I being a good friend? Are they being a good
Mm,
friend? Is this a healthy relationship? Because I love toxic female friendships in books and movies. That's like my favorite trope, but they're not so fun in real life. So I do
no,
hope that this also can,
no.
if the friendships in this book are reminding you of anybody, I think that's a good little clue that maybe you should do some analyzing there and see if that person
Yeah.
needs to be in your life.
And where can people find you and where can they get this book? Because at this point, your newest novel, The Last Time We Drowned, is out.
Yes, you can get it anywhere books are sold. If you're at the airport, you might be able to get it at the airport too, which is very
I love that.
exciting. And yeah, you can find me online. My website is just saratogaschaefer.com, and I'm pretty much everywhere on socials, but I only really use Instagram and Threads. And you can find me at Saratoga is here.
Awesome. And everybody stay tuned because they'll be back for another book club episode later this week.